Hi, this is Mark Mitchell from Wizard Strategy. Glad you could join us again today. As usual, I have an amazing guest for us today and an amazing subject that I don't know why I haven't addressed this in more depth in the past. I know I've touched upon it, but this is going to be really good. And what I mean is, if you want to know how to grow your sales in Canada, from a U.S. standpoint, our neighbor to the north, that is a good sized market that many people tell me, oh, yes, we sell in Canada or we want to sell in Canada. But it just seems like they don't quite go, oh my gosh, we are just rocking and rolling in Canada. And so my guest today is Alison Raes she's the founder of ILA Marketing, which is an independent rep firm that represents building material companies in Canada. And she's also the founder of a kind of new company called Katabatic Manufacturing, in which she's now has some construction adhesives products that she's now actually representing herself. So, Allison, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark. It's so nice to be on the show and get to spend some time with you because I've been listening to your podcast for a very long time. So a little bit about me. I guess ILA Marketing Group is 23 years old this year, which I can't believe we've cracked 20 years, let alone to be at 23. So been in the Canadian marketplace, and we've also operated in the US marketplace for a few of those years, for 23 years. And we represent, like you said, building material manufacturers all over, primarily those that are looking to enter into Canada. So usually, not always US companies, but usually US companies that are looking to have representation, sales, marketing, training, all sorts of services here in Canada. And as you identified, Katabatic Manufacturing is a new entity for us and sort of a wonderful surprise for us that came out of COVID that we've been able to take advantage of a great opportunity presented to us. So.
That's great. And I've known Allison, well, we've known each other for a number of years, and I also reach out to Allison frequently when I have questions about independent reps, because I'll see companies that will either use or want to use independent reps but not be happy with the results. And many times I find that they don't really understand how to work best with independent reps. And so I will get advice from people like Allison to help the company understand better how they could improve their relationship. But Allison and I were talking a week or so ago, and we were just talking about Canada. And Allison started to go off on, oh my gosh, Canada is such a different market, and it's different for this reason and this reason and this reason. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is really important information that we've got to I want to share with particularly U.S. building material companies who are, I'll just say struggle with this because I literally think that they see it either as another region of the U.S. Or another state or something, and they'll have either a rep or an independent rep, and they don't really understand what's different. I was working with a client the other day, and they are entering the Canadian market, and I was working with the sales rep they have there about, okay, how can this company best support you? And he rattled off, well, I need a sales sheet, I need a this, a this, a this. Okay, so I get the agency to get those things in the works, and then it comes back, and he had, in the first round of the sales sheet, they had the word color, and it was spelled COLOUR. And so I kind of, even I went, oh, gee, I think that's Canadian. That's good. That somebody thought of that. And then it was funny. The vice president of marketing of the company comes back, Mark, change that. We don't spell color that way. And I'm like, okay, are we going to Canada? I know it's just little signs like that, little details. And so let's just start with Well, I have so many questions for you. So, well, let's start there. There's the feeling about, oh gosh, we have to have things that are bilingual. Okay, geez, so we have to invest in having, English and French.
Yep.
And so, and it's kind of like, in my opinion, it's like, well, just translate this U.S. stuff, and find somebody that can translate to French, which, in my assumption, may not be the same as French Canadian, and
exactly
also
right.
the English in Canada. So let's talk just a minute about language, and then just about little details like that I think can make a big difference. Like I assume if I'm a Canadian and I get something and I see that this company made an attempt to make it English Canadian and French Canadian, that I will appreciate that, and I will notice companies that don't.
And you're absolutely right. And it's almost, if you think about us as consumers, whether we are professional consumers or, consuming for our own personal use, whatever that is, we want to feel like somebody connects with us. We want to feel like they understand us. And I think that this is exactly the same scenario here, where taking a second to truly understand, the local environment. It doesn't matter whether it's California to New York to Montreal to Vancouver. We want to feel like somebody understands what we're dealing with, our weather, our commuting to the office. We want people to kind of understand who we are. And so I think that bridging that gap in the professional environment, for a manufacturer that's entering into Canada, the ability to make sure that they capture that local feel, that they are talking to that person, whether they be in Quebec, whether they be in Ontario, whether they be in BC, because all of those jurisdictions are very different. And by the way, they're not next door to each other. You can't just drive from Vancouver to Montreal in 15 minutes kind of thing. So the idea is that we, kind of get a basic understanding of the country and of the differences within the country, to be able to pull back and say, okay, what are we hoping to achieve here? And we've been through this a number of times with manufacturers, where we do just sort of see this, let's just overlay what we do in the US, and it will translate. And we are very similar marketplaces. We're talking about the nuances. We're talking about small differences here, but they mean the world to the consumers. So, some of the things you touched on, the ability to translate material, especially when we're talking about technical material, installation guidelines, for example, making sure that those are not just in French, but Quebecois French, that we're dealing with terminology and vocabulary that is going to resonate with contractors in Quebec, not just contractors that maybe are operating in France, for example.
Yes, and now I want to just clarify. So, on one hand, if I was putting together some communication materials, we'll just say a brochure, a page on a website, whatever, that I can have one brochure that I can use across Canada. That the differences are, when I have a sales rep, or however I do it, I need to recognize that, yes, here's Canada. So I have this, I have a sales sheet that says, here's my wonderful new product, and it's in the right languages, and it uses metric measurements and so forth. And so that part is done. But then the next step I think we're talking about is that we'll just say Vancouver is as different to Toronto as Boston is to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And we recognize that in the US, but we don't necessarily take the time. And so, like I've said to companies that wanted to grow into Canada but weren't set up to have representation across Canada, is to, pick a market and get that market going successfully, and then move to the next one. All right, don't be a little bit successful in all the provinces or markets. Get good. Get your fair share out of Toronto, wherever you start,
Yep.
and then move along. And so I just thought I wanted to see if you agreed with that, and it sounds like you
I
do.
do. I do. I think, and you know what? I think if we were looking to enter into any country, and Canada's huge. I mean, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and if you're going to enter into any large territory like that, large country like that, being able to find some success in Toronto, for example, is going to resonate more with a Montreal or Vancouver architect than it is having success in Florida, for example, to bring to Vancouver. You're going to see people say, oh, they understand our codes. They understand how we build. They understand the differences that we see in the Canadian marketplace. And having that small, isolated success, I agree with you, to be able to have that small, isolated success. Maybe it is only one city, one basic market, to be able to bring that across to other markets. Smart approach. Yeah.
Then the other one, I've always felt that Canadians tend to build things more energy efficient.
They do.
That I can remember years ago when I first started, and I was working with Owens Corning and their fiberglass insulation, and story like we're trying to get somebody to put R13 in the wall, R19 in their attic, and here's like this house that had I remember R64 or something in the attic, and I forget what the walls were. And it's like I was like, oh my God,
Right.
and just the use of insulated concrete forms or just other things. So, and so that's one thing that I've noticed. Is there anything else that pops up about just I think when somebody builds something in Europe, they tend to build it to last forever.
Yes.
We tend to go, oh, okay, the life of this building is going to be 10 years, then we're going to tear it down and build something else, and so we think differently that way. What any other thoughts come to your mind about what's important to Canadians when they're thinking about construction?
For sure. And at this shift, I think we've seen in a lot of different, and we see it in a lot of different cities, jurisdictions, states. It can be as small as a municipality, as large as an entire country. But taking aside, and I'm not a building code expert. I'm not, but we've definitely seen that transition in the building code that has gotten progressively more energy efficient, progressively better at managing moisture. There's been a lot of things that they've looked to try to add some robustness to the building code, for sure. However, the one thing that I think we consistently see, some markets more than others, is that most developers, many home builders, and certainly on the custom home building side, are going to build far above code. Code is the minimum, and very few, I shouldn't say very few, but that it's usually just it's the basement, and we're looking to grow from there. And most product selection is seen as a marketable approach to our consumers. So our consumers are very aware of energy consumption. They're coming to the table asking these types of questions. And I would say that developers, home builders, certainly on the custom side, and certainly in some of the production side as well, are getting better at marketing something that is unique and better than the building code, stronger than it needs to be, better than it needs to be, and turning that into a competitive advantage. And consumers are willing to buy it. Our market, I mean, right now our market's on fire. So our market is absolutely crazy right now, both on, in our industry, but also in home sales and the escalation in pricing. But even when it's not, we're still seeing that people are not building the least that they have to. We're finding that they're building something more than that, and some markets considerably more. Architects are really used to that now.
So are you finding the same thing in commercial buildings, that they build beyond code, or do they more stay to what the code requires?
You know what? Somewhere in the middle. So definitely, but we've got these very aware organizations that have these cultures of sustainability and energy efficiency, and they may be in software development, but they're looking to be able to have their offices in a LEED building, for example.
Yes.
So what I think the thing that's working very well is that our developers, whether they be commercial or residential, are really tapping into what is marketable in our markets, and that is something that's higher than the building code.
Okay.
So does stuff get built at building code? You bet it does. But we're seeing these developers that are really excelling and getting a really strong market presence, building at considerably higher than that.
Yeah, that's been a real challenge in the States.
Sure.
It's builders will look and say, if the customer can't see it, it doesn't exist. So to have a better quality of insulation or anything that's hidden in the wall or something, there's no upside to that compared to having a granite countertop.
Exactly.
Something that the customer can see.
Yep.
Are your building codes like in the States we have a national building code, which
Yep.
is really just a model. It's like this. Here's the national building code. That they're constantly updating it and so forth. And then each state looks at it
Yes.
and says what they're going to do. Then each locality looks at what they're going to do.
Yes.
Does Canada then work the same way with codes?
Very similar approach, yes. Very
Okay.
similar approach. And again, I'm not a building code expert. However, that there's certainly we do see municipalities that even escalate further than the provincial code for sure.
Yes.
Vancouver's notorious for that. Vancouver's very almost famous throughout the building envelope side of the business for sure for some of the things that they require in their builds now. But it comes from experience. I mean, I remember a year here in Vancouver where they spent more money on fixing leaky condos. It was this massive, just how things had been built about 10 years prior. And they spent more money on fixing those leaky condos than they did in the entire building industry in the municipality. So they learned from that. And they said, okay, these are some of the things that we're going to work out of the building code for our very, very wet environment here in Vancouver. So.
Yes. Okay. And
Yeah.
we also have a problem with, call it with codes, with the contractors or builders will push back with the local municipality if they go, well, that's going to cost an extra $500, to in a house, and so we're gonna sell fewer houses, and then we also have call it selective enforcement.
Yeah.
We have certain things that are clearly in the building code, but the code inspector either one doesn't check for that, or two is just looks the other way, and. Is that also something that depends on the municipality as to?
It sure does, and it's only as good as the what I really think is the driving force is the voluntary compliance. I see voluntary compliance pretty high in our marketplaces.
Yes.
Whereas, and I don't know, I'm not to make a comparison so much as I just see voluntary compliance pretty high. Do I think that there are inspectors that go around and kind of maybe don't necessarily see everything, or maybe aren't highlighting everything? For sure. There's definitely experience levels that are going to be different from inspector to inspector.
Yes.
There's definitely differences there. But again, with the way that Canadian consumers are quite knowledgeable. They're very involved in social media. If something goes wrong somewhere, it's highlighted. It's not as though contractors, builders can sort of walk away from a job. And not that they're looking to do this, but it doesn't look like they can walk away from a job without doing their best work. And so I have to say that for the most part, we see pretty high levels of workmanship. Not always, not everywhere, but for the most part, people are voluntarily looking to do the best work that they can do.
Well, you bring up another point. I always so in the United States, we went through a period where people in building material sales got very frustrated because they'd been used to the importance of relationships, relationship with your customer. They know you, you know them. There's a trust level, and all of a sudden, we went through, maybe 20 years ago. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, relationships don't count. It's just who has the lowest price or whatever was important. But they've kind of seen where that relationship is less important, and I've always felt that didn't happen in Canada. That in fact, the Canadian building material companies that I work with that want to come to the United States, I'm always like, okay, you're too nice. Do you understand? You're just too nice and polite. Okay, you're selling against the shark here from the U.S. company, sure. Right? And you got to be just a little more, aggressive and confident in your product, and not so darn polite. And so. And I've heard this before, like, well, when we're doing business in Canada, it's like that relationship. If you're selling to a builder or a dealer, distributor, architect, whoever, that is an important part in Canada. Am I right with that?
Sure is. And I think I often think about this. Again, we operated in the U.S. I think it was 8 years or so for a period of time. We're in both countries, Pacific Northwest primarily, and I did notice that there's a bit of a different approach. And one of the things that we've got you may see some small markets in the US for sure. We have this keeper industry where people don't leave our industry. They just keep moving around through our industry. If you've got experience and you're relatively good at what you do, our industry needs people. We're growing and continuing to keep those people. What I would say is that the sales approach that I see successful in Canada versus the sales approach that I see successful in the US, or in my experience in the US, is that there's a lot more a consultative sell or a helping versus selling in Canada kind of approach. I'm going to be here for you next week. I'm going to be here for you in a month, and I'm going to be here for you if you have any issues. And these builders really rely on the people in our industry to be able to support that, not just the manufacturers, so much so that you'll even see it on the supply side where it might be a less expensive product. It might be a product that has a really good reputation in another area like the US or Europe or something like that. But the supply side will say, no, we're going to wait and make sure that's proven. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of, I got to protect my people. I got to make sure that they have the very best for me because they trust me. So is that really permeated our industry? You bet it has. And it's not that that I haven't seen that in the US. I just see this more consultative sell versus a strong push, we're the best kind of approach that tends to maybe put Canadians off a little bit. That would be my takeaway. It kind of puts people off. So we have seen situations where we've tried to overlay something verbatim from the US into Canada, and it kind of gets, a little bit of pushback where people are like, that just sounds a bit too much. That's a bit too braggy, or it's a bit too strong. And so I've definitely the same approach in the reverse, where a Canadian company going to the US may seem a little bit, on their heels, or a little bit shy to be proud of what they do.
Yes, exactly.
That make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Now,
yeah.
The next area that we touched upon before that I'd like to share is I'll call it distances. In the United States is a big country, but sure. We have lots of populated areas. So, the distance from Chicago to St. Louis, from St. Louis to Denver, or Des Moines or whatever, there's pretty much cities everywhere. I mean, you can go up maybe in Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota and something and find some kind of wide open areas, but most of it, you just go from city every 2 hours, you run into another big city, and so talk a little bit about how about the differences in distance, and so that the building material company goes, oh, wait a minute, wow, they have to never think about that. So talk a little about that difference.
Well, and it really lends itself, the last mile, the last kilometer in Canada of delivering product to our marketplaces is logistically challenging. If you look at our country, they say that approximately 80 to 85% of our population lives within 100 miles of the US border. So we are strongly dispersed east west and very, very a light disbursement or very few people north south. So as soon as you start, servicing these northern communities, and you start to see some very, very heavy logistic challenges and heavy cost. I've heard a number of times where somebody say, well, Ken, we're going to be in Montreal, would you be able to come, can you be there on Tuesday? We're like, well, that's like, yes, I can, but I do need to get on an airplane, so understanding the geography of Canada that's a great first step for a manufacturer entering into Canada, is just kind of understanding how the distances between our major centers. And also, we kind of separate the country into three different pieces. We have Western Canada, we have sort of central Canada, which you could put Ontario and Quebec together. That's a vast majority of our population right there. And then Atlantic Canada. And the difference, even time zones between the furthest west and the furthest east, is 4.5 hours. So we're dealing with a vast, vast country and a lot of miles to cover. Our supply chain is particularly important in Canada, partnering with a strong supply chain with really strong logistical capabilities. Don't even try and enter into these marketplaces without some good partners.
So, and when you say partners, I'm going to use the word distributor.
Yeah.
Just as my example, and because we talked about the distances that we think about our distributors deliver in the States,
Sure.
and I think you were mentioning sometimes like how far, like they could have to go 300 miles or something to deliver to a dealer or something.
For sure. Or
Yeah,
more.
or more, and
Yeah.
and so that's something where that dealer maybe is going to get a delivery every 2 weeks, every week, but not every other day probably. I
Yeah.
would assume with those distances.
For sure. And like you can look at some of the marketplaces even in British Columbia. It's not unheard of to be driving 8 to 10 hours to some of our northern communities. That's all serviced out of Vancouver. Edmonton services the north, pretty, with 10, 12, 14-hour drives to be able to service. And these are some of the strongest like big dealers. These aren't dealers that are selling a pallet of product. They're buying truckloads of product on a regular basis. So all into the northern communities in Quebec. So it permeates our whole country. No matter which region you're looking at, has these highly rural areas that demand this service, and in order to be a recognized supplier through many of the buying groups, which is something that is very different about Canada as well. We have to be able to service all of them.
Yeah, so I think about all of those trucks are probably coming back empty.
Yep.
So one, it's paying for the truck and the driver for those hours on the road that's full, and you deliver everything and turn around to drive those hours back empty, and so that would certainly add to the delivery cost. But I would assume that that's just from I don't know how that affects the manufacturer. I think that's a cost of doing business to the dealer in that locality.
Yeah,
If
certainly. Certainly, one of the things I mentioned, buying groups, and buying groups are a really strong part of the Canadian market, much stronger, as I understand it, than they are in the U.S. market. Very organized. They say somewhere in the range of 90 to 95% of building materials move through a buying group of some sort. So our true independents are few. And so in order, this logistic challenge that we see here in order to sort of, get the attention of these buying groups that have dealers everywhere and many dealers in rural areas. In order to tap into those organizations and really get their support, you need to, commit to servicing all of their locations and servicing all of their locations well. And so in doing so, it's a price of doing business. And we see our distributors really navigating that to make sure that they have good support in all of those northern communities, primarily northern communities.
But if I'm a manufacturer,
Yep.
and I'm selling truckloads
Yep.
To distributors, I'm not delivering anything less than a truckload, we'll say.
Yep.
Then what I'm hearing, a smart thing to look at, depending on your product, type of product, category, would be to look into, is there a buying group for this type of product? In other words, certainly it sounds like lumber dealers, there's a type of product, but maybe I'm selling a product that's sold through a one-step distributor, a specialty product. But to look at, is there a buying group, number one, if you get the interest of the buying group, and then to look and say, okay, now who's the distributor that can service these people, and then they'll be able to, if you get with the right distributor, they're gonna be the ones that are gonna be able to get the product to wherever it needs to go in Canada, correct?
Absolutely, and I just think that partnership with, strong supply chain it's. Again, I'm somewhat comparing it to the U.S., but in Canada, that partnership with your supplier, with your supply chain, and in particular your distributor, is critical to success.
Okay. Now, if you walked us across Canada,
Yep.
We can look and say in the States, we say New England, and we say, okay, they build things. They build things very well. Sometimes they're stubborn about, this is how my grandfather did it. This is how I did it. I'm not going to change, and even if this is a new, better product, you tell me. They can be quite stubborn and set in their ways. Then you go down to, as you go down the coast, down into Florida, you start to run into people, they start to get very concerned about hurricanes. So we have codes that you have to meet for that and so forth. And you're building maybe out of different materials like concrete block and so forth, maybe instead of wood frame. And then you go over to Texas, and they kind of have a reputation for building, big, showy houses that aren't particularly built well or with the best materials. But boy, they, if it was for, if you're going to film the TV show Dallas again, and nobody's going to look at the quality of the molding or the windows, this is going to work great. So, and then, you go to California, and you've got a lot more interest in energy and green and more income, so they will do new and inventive things and maybe more contemporary things. And you start going up the coast to Oregon and Washington, and now they're concerned about energy, but they've got more moisture issues to contend with, and and you can kind of easily, if you sell in the United States, you kind of you see it very differently. And so if we were to start in, if just a thought comes to mind, it's like, well, when I think of Vancouver, I think of, or British Columbia, I think of, these are the words come to mind. I think about in the prairies or Edmonton, or it just marches across and tell us what comes to mind when you think about.
Now that could be a podcast in and of itself. I'll do my best to keep it as brief as possible. I'll give you a few highlights across the country.
Okay.
We have very high value real estate, and we're talking residential here exclusively, but we have very high value real estate in the Vancouver marketplace. Architecturally, you will deal with people that are very concerned with moisture management, very concerned with thermal bridging, making sure that we have good energy efficiency. That is very, very strong in our market. When you talk about style, you definitely end up with, high value aesthetic and high value cladding options, roofing options, things like that. When you start moving east, you end up, we could probably package, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, possibly we could kind of put some of those trends all together. You're dealing with a lot of people that that have, very, very cold weather conditions. So, making sure that we've got triple pane windows and very good insulation properties through all of their builds, commercial and residential. Those would be, the ability to use their products in, very cold weather. That's we talk about this a lot with regard to Katabatic and with regard to adhesives, the ability to use these products in cold weather. Not everybody can do that. And it's hard to understand how these contractors are truly having what they're being handed on a typical day in January in Saskatoon, where I'm from. I'm from Saskatoon. And, what they're getting handed in those environments is it's very difficult for people that are in more acclimate or in more temperate weather zones to understand. Getting into Ontario, you're looking more into the production builder. We've got, subdivisions of much more so, and we'll see some of that in the prairies as well. So, but certainly looking for another market that's high value residential. So we're dealing with high values, and we've got kind of both scenarios of moisture management as well as cold weather conditions in those markets. We get asked about those conditions a lot. In Quebec, they have a lot of different building practices in Quebec that are stronger, more robust than some of our other marketplaces. And so they look for solutions, a lot of panelization in their cladding options in the Quebec marketplace. They really look for something. We see this, they accept new products very readily. They are so self-taught and they grab a hold of things and do such a great job of putting new products into builds, both architecturally at the specification side and all the way through. I think really progressive at times, certainly in our industry. And then Atlantic Canada, you're back to now you're cold, you're colder than the West Coast, and really having strong winds, a lot of concern with claddings and things that will not hold up to, conditions that these certainly residential applications, a standard residential application in Halifax needs to be bomber. It needs to be very, very strong for them to have 10 or 15 or even 20 years life of a typical building material. So in a nutshell, that would kind of be my highlights across.
Yeah, that was was very helpful and very insightful, and I'm sure to the listeners will give them something to think about. We also touched upon when we talked a week or so ago about, if you're going to sell in Montreal, Quebec, your rep needs to be fluent in French.
Yeah.
If your rep or your rep firm doesn't have someone fluent, just kind of forget that for now, and focus on the areas that are English speaking, and then look for or have a rep that is fluent in French, or you're wasting your time. Is that?
For sure. And I would even go so far, though, as to say that it's almost, depending on who you partner with, it's the option to say, I'm going to support all of Canada that speaks English, but not support Quebec, may not be an option. Right? You may need to make the choice. And this is something that we've seen a number of times, when the market's hot in the US, they kind of say, oh, it's okay. We'll develop Canada later. Right?
Yes.
When the market isn't maybe so brisk, and when people are looking for business and they're looking to grow sales, they may say, okay, it's time to really look at Canada, invest in Canada, have a look at it. Let's really get in there and see what we can do in the Canadian marketplace. It makes sense. I mean, sometimes many Canadians can drive, or you can source product from the US faster than you can drive to your next major Canadian city. Right?
Yes.
Because we're so close to the border. So the idea that some manufacturers we've seen sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out into Canada when the market's a bit slower. But now that the market's a bit fat or a bit more brisk in the U.S., we don't have the same supply capacity to extend to Canada, and you know, kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I would say that that can be really damaging. It would be, I think it behooves manufacturers to really be ready to come to Canada and support the market through ups and downs, because you know, it's a decent, it's the same size marketplace as California.
Well, I think that gets back to the importance of relationships. You
Yeah.
know, I've found when relationships are important, people remember. Are you said you were serious about Canada, then you were not. Now you're
Yeah,
back again. Am I supposed to believe you this time?
exactly.
And where maybe in the States that person has now moved on to another job and is not there, and so there isn't maybe that memory. But I would think that is another part of Canada. So the
In Quebec, you know, Quebec is in you'd asked, you know, can you kind of go through English Canada? You may be able to focus on one market and sort of extend, we talked about this earlier, you know, extend that success to other marketplaces in Canada. But if you're looking to open up Canada, feet on the street, it doesn't matter actually, in my opinion. I think you're better off to really invest in local um, people to be able to carry your message
yes,
and understand the building code, understand the players, understand the entire marketplace, than you are to try to, you know, come up here 3 or 4 times a year and hope for the best and hope that those, you know what I mean? Like that,
yes,
it can work,
yes.
but it's never, I've never noticed it be dramatically successful.
Okay.
Whereas those companies that do invest, they get really good attention.
No, that okay. That's
Yeah.
that's that's good to know because I would also think you may be able to, let's say, be in New York and sell into Toronto, you know, real close, you know, like Buffalo or something. And but if you know you're selling a product that an architect's going to specify in Toronto, well, he could be designing a building that's going to be built anywhere in Canada, and now you know you're going to spend that time selling the architect, but you don't have representation in the other city, and the general contractor is going to you know get you out of there probably,
For sure.
uh, and so that's yeah that's a good point to. To think about with that. The other thing I just want to touch upon is tell us about you know the world of big boxes
Oh yeah.
in Canada. You know,
Yeah.
I mean they it's like you know it's like we got Rona and Lowe's or this or that or whatever
Yeah.
it seems like you know. So you know, give us just a you know the current state of affairs with big boxes.
You know, it's again, I'll try to kind of talk about differences maybe. You know, we've definitely seen big boxes have been a part of Canadian market for some time. They have, depending market to market, they can have very strong stores. They can have more, you know, kind of do it yourself or consumer oriented stores. It kind of depends on the market that they're in. But I definitely, the one trend that I've definitely seen more of over the last number of years here is the real strength of some of our big boxes to get really aggressive at the contractor level, really focusing on the professional. And I think for a number of years that maybe wasn't as well done. It was more of a, you know, we're looking for Mr. and Mrs. Jones to come in and buy paint and a few things, and here's your shed package. Well, they're getting much more sophisticated. They've really, we've seen this in the US, I think, as well. I mean, they're
Yes.
such a you know, really flexing their muscles, some of the systems and buying power and you know, the things that really made them successful on the more do-it-yourself or consumer side, they're really flexing those muscles on the pro side as well. And so I think that's something to watch for sure. In the Canadian marketplace, we still have you know, a really, really strong, what I would call independent dealer network. They may be flying the banner of Home Hardware or Timber Mart or Sexton or one of the, it could be some of the Rona organization loads. We could see some big box and certainly into the buying group side, where they're considered independents, but they really are members of these organizations to be able to gain buying power and to be able to gain access to advice on floor plans, advice on which product mix I should be a part of. We see dealer ownership transitioning right now from maybe some of the retirees. You've got people that are handing down with it succession within their families or selling their dealer stores. And in doing that, we're seeing some youth come into the organization, and certainly seeing some different faces and different focuses in those dealers. But that independent dealer is very, very strong in the Canadian market, and they really have understood and connected with their builder partners. It's through acquisition that we've seen some of those small regional players kind of get picked up, 5, 7, 10 location players that have had a real pro presence, and we've seen a lot of them get picked up by some of the big box.
Okay, yeah. So that sounds a lot like how we see hardware stores, in the States, where you're a True Value Hardware, but really you're an independent. And so that in Canada happens a lot with lumber dealers, is what I'm hearing you say.
A ton, and there's a lot of multi-store. I'm not sure what the percentage would be, but there's a lot of ownership that owns a number of stores. So they've made this, if they've got 3 stores that work, they often grow to 5, 6, 7 stores, in a region, to gain some power in that regard as well. So there's, the consolidation in our industry has been ongoing since the day I entered in, and I'm sure it will continue. But yeah, there's the independents still have a tremendous amount to offer, and are a very strong part of the Canadian market.
Yes. Okay. Hey, well, this has been great. Lot of great things to think about, and I'm sure that for the listeners that are interested in Canada, you've given them a lot of good things to think about and step back. And so, if I were to kind of summarize what I heard today, it's one the first one is to understand the country and its size, and in other words, how big it is, but where the population is, and how each area is a little different, just like we would look at one state versus another, or Southern California versus Northern California, two very different areas. And then to understand the importance of relationships are still very strong. It isn't like, I got a better price today, so this guy will buy from me because I got a better price. Maybe not going to happen. To be a little more patient, maybe, I guess, to do your due diligence, do your homework, to really understand the market, and ideally to have a good I'll call it local representation in Canada. What would you say, if you were to, could you have, I'm going to say, 3 reps? I'm just looking at what would be like you would consider a minimal amount of representation in order to, do just not the greatest job in the world, but to have somebody, I guess, in on the West Coast, maybe somebody in the Toronto area, and somebody in Quebec.
And if I had to, if you were doing the least amount possible, meaning if you're really asking somebody to do a decent job and not spreading them so thin that they just couldn't succeed, I think having somebody in Western Canada, preferably Vancouver, simply from a standpoint, it's the largest market. A lot of Design happens here a lot of, if we're talking specification and things like that, a lot of that is derived here and starts here. And then the next would be, and this would be as thin as you could possibly go. It would be preferable to have two people in the East, but having a bilingual rep in either Montreal or Toronto. So if you were to have two reps, that would be your absolute minimum.
Yes.
And three would be better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's been great advice. Hey, and in honor of our discussion of Canada today, I looked hard and I could not find my Canadian Mountie socks, and I couldn't find my Canadian flag socks, and I couldn't find my Edmonton Oilers socks. I have so many socks. So I had to settle for somebody sent me, I don't know, somebody sent me this Pierre Trudeau socks there.
There's Justin for you.
Justin Trudeau. Sorry, I get it mixed up there. But
Pierre's got gray hair now.
Okay. Well, but anyway, I always gotta have my socks match the subject, so that worked good. But any final thing you want to leave anybody with?
More than anything, the Canadian market is worth investing in. We see really good partnerships available here. We see our marketplaces are healthy. We look, I won't say we're recession proof, I'll knock on wood even saying the word, but we have some things here that I think yield for strong long-term growth. If you're a US manufacturer, you're looking to enter into Canada, it's very doable. Do your homework. It's definitely something that is worth the challenge at the beginning.
Yes. Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks again for giving us some of your valuable time and your expertise, and really appreciate that. And in fact, I'm looking forward to having Allison speak at the next Wizard Summit on this very subject, where we're going to get into a little more depth and have some pictures and things and maps and stuff to get further into this.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for listening, and we'll look forward to you tuning into the next podcast. Take care.